The Mafia boss invited his ex-wife to his wedding just to humiliate her. He set her up in the front row expecting tears and disgrace. Then the music cut out. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom, flanked by armed security, pulled directly onto the red carpet. Franca stepped out. She wasn't broken. She was radiant. And holding her hands were 3 identical little boys. 3 perfect heirs. The woman he called Baron just destroyed his wedding, exposed his secret, and brought the one thing the boss could never have. This is the 1 second that costs him his empire. If you've ever been wrongly blamed, hit that like button right now. Franca is about to prove that standing up for your truth is the most powerful weapon of all. Once, in the high-stakes, glittering world of organized crime, there lived a man named James Arnord. His name was power. His word was law. With broad shoulders and intricate dark tattoos covering his chest and face, James wore custom-made suits and a cold mask of absolute control. But beneath the invincible facade of the Mafia boss, there was a 7-year secret that filled his luxurious compound with cold silence. His wife, Franca, had not given him a son. One evening, the simmering tension of their childless marriage exploded. Franca, beautiful and gentle, stood against the wall. James slammed his hand down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. 7 years, Franca. 7 years. You expect me to die without a legacy? Without an heir to my name? Franca whispered, her voice trembling. James, I have begged. I have suffered. It is not my fault. Maybe we should check the tests again. James's eyes were cold and hard. I am the problem. Do not insult me. You are the curse on my name. You eat my food, you live in my house, and you give me nothing but silence. By tomorrow, I want you out. Our marriage is finished. Franca didn't sleep. She sat on the cold marble floor of the master closet, surrounded by racks of designer dresses and leather goods, expensive items that suddenly felt worthless. Outside the window, the city lights blurred through her tears. When the morning sun finally broke, she grabbed a small black duffel bag and filled it with only the things that mattered. Her medical records, the ones James had always dismissed, a faded photograph of her parents, and the few thousands of dollars she had secretly saved. The house staff avoided her eyes, confirming her outcast status. She was not just divorced. She was excommunicated from a kingdom where the rule was absolute. She knew James would be watching, not caring what she took, only that she left. He wanted her gone, forgotten, her reputation as barren, a dark stain on her history. She left the compound, not looking back at the wrought iron gates. She took a cheap taxi, directing the driver far away from the mansions and high-rise apartments, heading instead toward the older, busy side of the city. Her only refuge was the apartment of her best friend, Lena. Lena, a nurse who had worked in the city's chaotic public hospital system for years, was the only person in Franca's life who hadn't been intimidated or bought by James Arnord. She opened the door, took one look at Franca's pale, drawn face and the single duffel bag, and pulled her inside without a word. He did it, didn't he? Lena asked, closing the door and bolting it, creating a needed barrier against the outside world. Franca couldn't speak, sinking onto the worn sofa. He called me a curse, Lena. He said I wasted his life. Lena sat beside her, her expression practical, not pitying. He is a monster wrapped in Armani. He needed a reason to toss you out, and blaming the woman is the oldest trick in the book. She took the medical file from Franca's bag. Did you ever get a proper test outside of his doctor's office? Franca shook her head, pulling her legs to her chest. He never allowed it. He said I was the variable. He refused to be tested himself, always saying it was beneath him. Right. Because bosses don't have problems. Other people are the problems, Lena muttered, handing Franca a mug of hot tea. You know what, Franca? Forget James. Forget the jewelry and the security detail and the fake life. We need to focus on what he tried to take. Your name. You need to know the truth for yourself. Over the next few days, Franca slept little, waking up in cold sweats, expecting to hear James's car pull up or a fist banging on the door. The fear was deep, ingrained from years of living under his volatile control. She felt exposed, yet oddly free. The air in Lena's small apartment was honest, thick with the smell of boiled coffee and antiseptic, lacking the chilling luxury of James's house. Lena spent hours convincing her that James wouldn't waste his resources tracking a woman he had successfully branded as worthless. He doesn't care about you. He cares about his reputation. He's already shopping for a new bride to produce an heir. He assumes you're weeping in a gutter somewhere. Finally, Lena booked the appointment. She told Franca, "We're going to a clinic far across the city where no one knows his name. We do this for you. We do this for the record. We prove the truth so that one day, when you look in the mirror, you don't see the barren woman he created." Franca nodded, the fear subsiding just enough to allow a tiny spark of defiance to ignite. The Mafia boss had taken her home and her name, but he could not take her truth. She looked at the cheap, worn wooden table, a stark contrast to the gold leaf she was used to, and felt a strange sense of grounding. This was the start of the real fight, the fight for herself. The small, anonymous clinic was tucked away in an unremarkable office building, a world away from the gleaming steel towers James Arnord ruled. Franca sat rigid in the waiting room, Lena gripping her hand. The air conditioning unit hummed louder than the anxiety pounding in Franca's chest. For 7 years, the word barren had been a chain around her heart, forged by James's constant scorn. She was terrified that the truth, the cold, clinical confirmation of his cruelty, was about to be delivered. When the female doctor, Dr. Reyes, finally called her name, Franca felt a wave of nausea. She went through the motions of the examination and the comprehensive tests, all the while resisting the urge to blurt out, "Just tell me if I'm a curse or not." A tense week later, Lena drove Franca back to the clinic. They sat in Dr. Reyes's calm, quiet office. The doctor placed a file on the desk, not meeting Franca's eyes immediately. "Franca," Dr. Reyes said gently, "we ran extensive tests, far beyond the scope of any cursory scan. Everything is clear. Your hormonal balance is excellent. Your reproductive organs are healthy, functioning perfectly. You are, medically speaking, perfectly capable of carrying a child." The words, "perfectly capable," didn't feel like a relief. They felt like an explosive shockwave. The world tilted. Franca stared at the file, then at Lena, who had tears of pure, unadulterated relief streaming down her face. "But James said," Franca stammered, the name of the boss feeling suddenly small and powerless. "I can't speak to what your ex-husband claimed," Dr. Reyes replied, a hint of steel entering her voice. "But I can speak to science. The problem was never with you. You are healthy, Franca. The focus now must turn to the male factor." In that instant, the 7-year-old shackles of shame broke. The fear that had kept her small and silent dissolved into a pure, cold vindication. James hadn't divorced her because she was a failure. He divorced her to hide his own. He had taken his vulnerability and weaponized his power and reputation to inflict pain. The Mafia boss had no idea she was healthy. Now, armed with the truth, she had to disappear and find the right man before James could find her and fix his mistake. Subscribe now, because the next betrayal is already coming. Franca rose from the chair, feeling a lightness and inner steel she hadn't experienced since she met James. This small, anonymous document was more valuable than all the wealth he possessed. It wasn't just a medical confirmation. It was a righteous, unforged truth. The woman who walked out of that clinic was no longer the Mafia boss's broken ex-wife. She was a woman armed with the truth, and the fight for her future had just begun. The revelation that she was fertile did not erase Franca's pain, but it purified her rage into quiet, controlled purpose. She had been freed by science, but she had to build her own freedom with effort. James Arnord had built his empire on fear. Franca would build her new life on silence and stability. With Lena's encouragement and a small loan from a local community bank, far safer than any of James's dubious financial channels, Franca started a small artisanal bakery. She found a tiny commercial space near Lena's apartment, far from the polished, dangerous world she had once inhabited. She named it Veritas, Truth. She baked classic American recipes, focusing on quality and simple elegance, much like the life she now aimed for. The early days were a blur of aching muscles, flour dust, and the satisfying smell of yeast. She worked 18-hour shifts, scrubbing floors, mixing dough, and counting pennies. This physical labor, this genuine effort, was the antidote to the suffocating idleness of James's mansion. Every perfectly risen loaf and every successful sale was a small, silent victory over the man who had called her worthless. She no longer had time to weep. She only had time to create. Lena was her rock. While Franca worked, Lena used her network to ensure Franca's disappearance was complete. They never talked about James. They talked about inventory, profit margins, and Lena's latest disastrous date. Franca deliberately shed every accessory, every habit that could tie her back to the Mafia boss. She cut her hair, traded silk for sensible denim, and learned how to ride the subway. She was succeeding in the most important mission, staying off James's radar. To the outside world, Franca Arnord, the barren ex-wife, was a ghost, a cautionary tale that had served its purpose. As the months passed, the dark shadows under Franca's eyes lifted. The tension in her shoulders unwound. She gained not just independence, but a quiet, formidable confidence. She no longer needed a golden cage to feel safe. She had built her own strong walls out of flour and brick. Then, 6 months after the divorce, a small, toxic piece of the past pierced the peace she had worked so hard to achieve. Lena burst into the bakery one morning, a city tabloid clutched in her hand. The front page screamed in bold, gaudy print. Arnord's billion-dollar wedding. New Mafia princess? The article detailed the impending nuptials of James Arnord to a famous model, outlining the extravagant scale, the powerful guest list, and the boss's determination to produce an heir immediately. It was a thinly veiled public announcement that he had found a real woman to replace his failed ex-wife. Franca felt a cold spike in her chest. Not pain, but a resurgence of the primal need for justice. She walked over to the counter, picked up a perfectly cooled sourdough loaf, and calmly sliced it. "He's moving fast," Franca said, her voice steady. "He's trying to erase you," Lena countered, spreading the tabloid out on the steel counter. "This isn't just a wedding, Franca. This is a public declaration that he won. He's celebrating your failure." Franca looked at the glossy photo of James, his tattooed face arrogant and smiling. He looked exactly the same. He hadn't changed, hadn't learned. He was still ruling through deception.
No,
Franca said, a slow, dangerous smile touching her lips. She finished slicing the bread and wiped her hands clean.
he thinks he won.
But he hasn't even begun to lose yet. The bakery, Veritas, was where Franca met Michael. He wasn't flashy. He wore simple, well-made clothes and had the steady, calm eyes of someone who worked with precision. An architect, she learned. He didn't demand attention or command the room. He waited patiently for his sourdough, often sketching quietly at a small table. Franca was initially wary. Years of marriage to James had conditioned her to see kindness as a weakness or a trap. But Michael offered genuine ease. He didn't ask about her past, and he never pressed when she spoke vaguely about her previous life. He simply saw Franca the baker, the woman who took pride in the perfect crumb of her bread. Their relationship unfolded slowly, built not on danger, but on the quiet, profound comfort of shared respect. Michael was patient, giving her all the space she needed, instinctively understanding the high walls she had built around herself. He represented everything James was not: stable, gentle, and utterly safe. Franca began to realize that true strength wasn't about the power to intimidate. It was the power to heal and protect. 8 months after leaving the Mafia boss, Franca married Michael in a tiny courthouse ceremony, witnessed only by Lena. She didn't seek fanfare. She sought permanence. A few weeks later, the persistent nausea wasn't due to the early morning shift at the bakery. Franca went for a checkup, convinced it was stress. The moment the doctor confirmed she was pregnant, Franca wept, not with joy, but with the crushing relief that the lie James had used to destroy her was finally and irrefutably dead. She was whole. Then came the ultrasound. Franca lay there, Michael holding her hand, watching the screen. The doctor smiled. "Well, Franca, you certainly make up for lost time. It's not one baby." Franca looked at Michael, who had turned pale. The doctor chuckled. "It's 3. You are having triplets." Franca didn't gasp. She exhaled, a sound that felt 7 years long. 3 children. Not just an heir, but an overflow. God or fate, or simply biology, had answered James's curse with a defiant, spectacular abundance. Her vision of a quiet, stable future immediately shattered, replaced by a beautiful, overwhelming chaos. But holding Michael's hand, looking at those 3 tiny lives flickering on the screen, Franca felt no fear, only the dazzling, fierce joy of a woman who was truly, finally, blessed. She was ready. The triplets, 3 beautiful boys with Franca's soft eyes and Michael's gentle nature, were born 9 months later. Franca named them Liam, Noah, and Elias, her 3 sources of light. Their arrival confirmed her health, solidified her new life, and was the absolute living proof that James Arnord had been a liar and a coward. She often looked at their tiny, perfect faces and felt a fierce, protective joy that dwarfed any memory of her former husband's power. Life with Michael and the boys was a beautiful, overwhelming mess of late nights, formula, and laughter. Franca had found her true reward. She rarely thought of James until the package arrived. It was delivered by a high-end, discreet courier service, sealed in a heavy white box with a gold wax stamp. Lena, visiting with coffee, eyed it with suspicion.
"What is that, a bomb?"
Lena asked, holding it at arm's length. Franca opened it with a careful hand. Inside, nestled in black silk lining, was a single thick invitation card engraved in gold. It was a formal invitation to the wedding of James Arnord and his new bride, scheduled for the following month. The location was the city's most extravagant, high-security ballroom. The invitation was addressed specifically to Ms. Franca Arnord, front row seating reserved. It wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated, deliberate act of malice. James wasn't inviting her to share his joy. He was inviting her to witness her permanent, total replacement, intending to display his new heir-producing wife and prove the finality of Franca's disgrace. He wanted her there, sad and small in the front row. Franca didn't feel hurt. She felt a cold, exhilarating clarity. She placed the invitation on the counter next to a photo of her 3 sleeping boys. "He wants me to attend," Franca said, her voice steady. "He wants to see me cry." "Then you tear it up and throw it in the trash," Lena insisted. "Why give the monster the satisfaction?" Franca leaned on the counter, looking at the invitation, then at the photograph of the triplets. "No. He invited me to his wedding, and I am going to accept." "Franca! He's a Mafia boss. He's dangerous. He just wants to see you break." "And I have the triplets, Lena. I have the proof he doesn't want anyone to see," Franca countered. "This isn't about crying or breaking. This is about delivering the truth he tried to bury. He used his wedding to destroy me. I will use his wedding to set myself free, once and for all." The plan that followed was executed with the same precision Franca now applied to her baking. First, the aesthetics. Franca chose an elegant, high-impact yellow dress, a color of happiness, sunshine, and audacious visibility. A complete rejection of the black she was expected to wear. The triplets would wear matching ivory suits. Second, the entrance. Franca knew her modest lifestyle would be mocked. She needed a statement that matched James's level of spectacle, a single item that screamed triumph, not pity. She called a trusted high-end car service, arranging to rent the most opulent, flashy vehicle possible for 1 hour, a black Rolls-Royce. Third, the safety. This was James Arnord's territory, and Franca was bringing the one thing that could shatter his life. They couldn't risk the boys. Michael, though anxious, understood the profound necessity of this final confrontation. Through a connection in Michael's construction firm, a man with discreet, capable military training, they arranged for a 2-man security detail, highly professional but unmarked, to act as her escorts for the brief event. They would secure the drop-off and ensure a swift, safe exit, their presence a silent deterrent against the boss's men. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. When she walked in, James wouldn't see the pitiful ex-wife he invited. He would see the powerful, fertile woman he foolishly threw away, flanked by the future he could never have. The drive to the extravagant ballroom felt impossibly long and impossibly short. Inside the rented Rolls-Royce, the air was thick with the scent of leather and residual anxiety. Franca sat in the back, her body draped in the bold yellow dress, the fabric a stark, defiant contrast to the black interior. Her 2 security escorts, silent and imposing, occupied the front seats. Liam, Noah, and Elias, dressed in their crisp ivory suits, were strapped securely into their child seats. They were oblivious to the high drama unfolding, giggling and pointing at the passing city lights. Franca watched them, and the last remnants of fear evaporated. These boys were her armor, her shield, and her undeniable truth. She was not doing this for revenge. She was doing this for vindication, for the woman James had tried to erase. As they turned the final corner, the ballroom came into view, dazzling and oppressive. Cameras flashed. Paparazzi shouted James's name, Expensive cars idled, disgorging high society guests and Mafia associates. This was James's stage, built for him to bask in glory and inflict pain. The Rolls-Royce glided silently toward the entrance, cutting across the red carpet. An attendant, expecting only the wealthy bridal party, rushed forward, his face a mask of confusion. The car door was opened, not by the valet, but by the largest of Franca's escorts, who stood sentinel, his gaze sweeping the crowd. The sudden silence was deafening. It started at the velvet rope and spread backward into the marble foyer. The crowd, accustomed to spectacle, was nevertheless paralyzed by the unexpected break in protocol. They stared, searching for the celebrity worthy of such a powerful, controlled entrance. Franca took a slow, deep breath, centered herself in the present, and descended from the car. The photographers went ballistic, the flashes turning the night into day. She stepped onto the carpet with perfect, unhurried poise. She was an absolute vision of quiet, non-negotiable success. Her eyes, usually soft, held a cold, calm fire. She looked past the stunned faces of the guests, past the whispered names of her ex-husband's associates, and focused only on the doorway. Then she reached into the car and gently unstrapped her three boys. Liam, Noah, and Elias, beautiful and identical in their matching suits, took her hands. They stood, a radiant, undeniable trinity, facing the silent, paralyzed judgment of James Arnold's world. The moment was absolute. The defeated ex-wife was here, draped in triumph, with the three living miracles James had declared impossible. She did not rush. She did not look around. Franca lifted her chin, the yellow of her dress blazing under the lights, and, guided by her escorts, began her slow, deliberate walk toward the entrance, ready to deliver the final, crushing truth. The grand ballroom was a cathedral of wealth. Impossibly tall ceilings, crystal chandeliers casting gold dust over the sea of expensive suits, and at the center, the altar, draped in thousands of white roses. James Arnold stood next to his bride, his broad, tattooed shoulders encased in a tuxedo. His face, usually a mask of control, was fixed in a sneer of arrogant anticipation, waiting for the arrival of his last, best victim. Then the murmuring crowd went utterly silent. James, sensing the shift, turned his head. His eyes, cold and assessing, swept the entrance, looking for the source of the disruption. His sneer vanished. He saw Franca, radiant, serene, and absolutely devastating in the yellow dress. Her two escorts stood like statues, but it was the small, matching figures holding her hands that ripped the air from James's lungs. Three of them, Liam, Noah, and Elias, triplets, perfectly identical, white-skinned, with the unmistakable bearing of Franca's new world. The wedding hall became a tableau of shock. James's eyes, usually steady and hard, darted wildly between Franca's calm face and the undeniable evidence of her fertility. His new bride, a beautiful woman named Valentina, followed his gaze. She had been nervous all morning about James's past and his refusal to discuss the possibility of their own fertility tests. When she saw the three boys, the realization of his lie and the shame he had inflicted hit her instantly. Franca did not raise her voice. She walked past the rows of stunned guests, stopping just short of the altar. She looked directly at James, ignoring the bride and the priest.
"You invited me to your wedding, James,"
Franca said, her voice clear, calm, and carrying across the silence. "You expected me to be sad and broken. You needed me to be barren so you could remain a god to your family and your men." She gently nudged her triplets forward.
I came to show you my gift, the one you said was impossible, the truth.
The truth was beautiful, tangible, and standing in 3 small suits. Valentina, the bride, suddenly spun on James, her white bouquet dropping to the marble floor. You lied to her? You lied about the children? She hissed, the beautiful wedding ruined by the sheer exposure. If you lied to her about that, what else is a lie? Your pride is a sickness, James. She didn't wait for an answer. Valentina ripped the veil from her hair, threw it to the ground, and walked swiftly past the silent guests and out the door. The wedding was over. James Arnord, the Mafia boss, stood utterly alone at the altar, his face contorted in a silent, destructive blend of fury and humiliation, destroyed by the triplets he insisted could never exist. If you cheered for Franca, let me know in the comments with a yellow heart. This victory proves that toxic power always collapses in the face of truth. Share this story if you believe in standing up for yourself. Franca did not stay to watch the fallout. She was already back in the Rolls-Royce, strapping her triplets securely, before the stunned wedding guests had fully broken their silence. The moment James's control shattered, her mission was complete. She had delivered the truth and reclaimed her dignity. The aftermath in James's world was swift and brutal. The wedding was canceled, generating a flood of scandal that went far beyond gossip. The humiliation, broadcast across every major network and digital platform, was a blow not just to his ego, but to his reputation among his peers. The Mafia boss had been revealed as a liar, a weak man who used his power to cover up his own inadequacy. Trust, the foundation of his operation, crumbled. Business deals faltered. His control slipped. A week later, James finally went to a reputable clinic in secret, driven by a desperate need to discredit Franca's assertion. The results confirmed the cold, crushing reality. His sperm count was catastrophically low. The problem was, and always had been, him. The source of his greatest fear was externalized, and the price was his empire. Meanwhile, Franca's life settled into a rhythm of stability and warmth. She returned to her small bakery, to Michael's steady love, and to the joyous, loud chaos of 3 rapidly growing boys. The name James Arnord slowly faded into the past, becoming a distant, closed chapter. One rainy afternoon, a small, plain envelope arrived at the bakery, bearing no return address. Franca opened it to find a single handwritten note. There was no signature, only 2 words. I am sorry. Franca held the note, running her thumb over the rough paper. She didn't feel triumph, only a deep, settled peace. The rage was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of closure. She hadn't wanted his apology. She had wanted her freedom. The shame he carried now was a burden he chose, not one he forced on her. She walked over to the trash can and dropped the note inside. Then, she turned to the back room, where Michael was teaching Liam how to stir batter, with Noah and Elias watching, covered in flour. Franca smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile of a woman who was truly free. She had found her happily ever after, not by defeating a monster, but by building a life that made his power entirely irrelevant. Thank you for watching to the end. I believe you enjoyed it. We have a lot of other interesting stories like this lined up for you already, so click the image showing on your screen to watch the next. Don't forget to subscribe.